The state subsidizes the wealthy and well-connected. The state preserves the power and wealth of the exploitative class, not only by creating cartels and monopolies, but also through subsidizing the inefficient activities of its cronies. Tariffs. I remember arguing about tariffs with Dad when I was a high school student. I didn't understand basic economics then, but I knew there was something wrong with treating goods and services differently because they came from other countries. It was chauvinistic, nationalistic, discriminatory. Now, I realize, too, how much tariffs disadvantage ordinary people in the territory of a state that imposes them, while benefiting elites. Tariffs are, effectively, subsidies by the state to favored industries and firms. A state's tariffs may not actually exclude goods or services from outside its borders, but tariffs can make these goods and services a lot less attractive to purchasers inside its borders. In so doing, it props up wealthy, well-connected businesses that don't want to be undersold by foreign producers. The foreign producers become victims of nationalistic bigotry, but so do the state's own subjects who cannot obtain goods and services as inexpensively as they otherwise could and who are forced to subsidize privileged businesses. A particularly stark example, agriculture subsidies, which prop up inefficient agribusinesses at the expense of foreign agriculture producers, and which therefore constitute significant ongoing sources of poverty around the world. Transportation. State subsidies significantly affect transportation. In brief, state subsidies make long-haul transportation more economically viable when compared with short-haul transportation than it would otherwise be. Investment in road construction is one obvious example. The use of eminent domain to acquire land on which highways and railroads can be constructed reduces their costs to their primary users, whom it effectively subsidizes. Highways are primarily used by large firms that ship goods over long distances, so subsidies that enable them to pay less than their fair share of highway costs give them an unfair advantage over firms that don't rely on long-distance shipping. The state's funding of highways subsidizes big firms in particular and encourages them to stay big and become bigger. Construction, real estate, and urban sprawl. The ability to deduct home mortgage interest payments from taxable income is often framed as a way of ensuring that everyone can live, quote, the American dream, unquote. But in practical terms, it amounts to an enormous subsidy to the construction and real estate industries, one that drives up housing prices. If I can deduct interest payments, I may be willing to pay more for a house than I otherwise would. By encouraging new home purchases, and thus the construction of new homes, the mortgage subsidy makes urban sprawl more likely. Land near city centers is already occupied and often quite expensive, so it makes sense to site newly built homes nearer urban peripheries. So, of course, do transportation subsidies. If it's cheaper to drive, people will be more likely than they would otherwise to commute long distances to and from work, and bedroom communities will emerge to service them. Research and development. State grants and other kinds of subsidies force the public to pay the cost of big businesses' research and development activities. Investing in research and development is not only costly, but also risky. There's no guarantee that it will yield anything of value. But if basic research befitting a business can be performed by a university scientist funded by a public grant before entering the public domain, the business can reap the benefit while shouldering just a fraction of the real cost. At the same time, given the vast amount spent on research and development by the state, people interested in applying its results may be less likely to spend money on basic research. Directly and indirectly, the state may crowd people out of work by making what they're doing uneconomical. Protection against liability for environmental harms. A good example of the problem with regulation. Laws officially characterized as designed to defend the environment sometimes actually prevent polluters from being sued for the harms they cause. The same thing happens with respect to, for instance, medical devices. By announcing that, say, the U.S. federal government is responsible for taking care of a pollution problem, the law may also be telling local people who might want to file lawsuits, butt out. Federal preemption rules may be justified as ensuring regularity and predictability, but their actual function may often be to protect businesses from attempts to hold them accountable for harms that aren't acknowledged by the relevant laws, and that could be prevented by more careful firms willing to invest more effort and avoid harming consumers and the non-human world, and to protect their reputations with consumers. Pro-business labor laws. While the state certainly confers some privileges on unions, in part to counterweight the many privileges it confers on businesses, big businesses are arguably net beneficiaries of labor legislation. Such legislation is often framed as having limited the power of these businesses, and undoubtedly some business leaders were unenthusiastic about various features of the National Labor Relations Act, and the NLRA did require businesses to bargain with unions in some circumstances in which they hadn't had to do so previously. But, viewed in context, it's clear that the NLRA led and was likely intended by at least some of its supporters to lead to a reduction in labor conflict. Pre-NLRA unions, not legislators, won the first big battles in the struggle for the 8-hour day, for instance. Unions willing to be confrontational repeatedly emerged victorious in tussles with employers. The current labor law framework has had the practical effect of limiting workers' options and opportunities by, for example, outlawing union shop and close shop agreements, creating opportunities for employers to affect the boundaries of bargaining units in ways that will strengthen their positions, ruling out secondary boycotts or multi-site or general strikes, requiring cooling-off periods, eliminating union hiring halls, mandating arbitration of labor disputes, prohibiting various kinds of non-union participation in management, providing the termination of strikes by presidential decree, and requiring that collective bargaining focus on a narrow range of work-related issues. That framework has supported, indeed co-opted, unions interested in working within the existing set of power relations. And it has made it harder for unions like the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, to challenge employers' power. Without the state to tip the scales, unions like the IWW could use their real bargaining strength to improve workers' influence over their work lives, their job security, and their compensation levels. Bailouts. A list of state subsidies to plutocrats wouldn't be complete without a reference to the unimaginably huge bailouts distributed by the Bush II and Obama administrations. The single biggest chunk of bailout money has arguably gone to Wall Street, home of irresponsible investment banks and brokerage houses that have now been taught a valuable lesson. If you gamble with people's money and promote irresponsible speculation fueled in the first place, of course, by the misbehavior of the Fed, you don't need to worry. A golden parachute, provided at public expense, will be waiting for you. Automakers have learned a similar lesson. Make expensive, inefficient, polluting cars that people don't want and the public will be done to shore up your failing operations. At the same time, the resources allocated to inefficient automakers won't be available for use for other purposes, including the creation of more efficient and environmentally friendly transportation technologies. Seizing land for privileged businesses. Suppose the state seizes land for a road. The fact that the land has to be seized means that the state wasn't prepared to pay what the owner wanted. A non-state actor couldn't have obtained the land at the price the state was prepared to pay, and the money the state saved amounts to a subsidy to the new owner. And the fact that the ordinary people will be required to pay for the land without regard to the extent to which they use the road that's built on it means that those who use it a lot, like businesses that transport goods on it, are being subsidized. Eminent domain authority, the authority the state claims to seize people's land, ought to be unsettling in a lot of contexts. But eminent domain actions are especially troubling when land is snapped up in order to be transferred to the control of a business, a developer, perhaps, or a big box retailer. Private developers are, not surprisingly, major players in local politics, and it takes little insight to guess whether they will likely have more influence than homeowners on what local governments do. When businesses benefit from forced sales, ordinary people, people whose homes are confiscated, ordinary people whose taxes pay for court proceedings, are being required to subsidize their activities. Creating privileges using the tax system. If the state has no legitimate authority, then no one owes it any duty to support its activities. As, in effect, a gang of violent thugs, the state has no legitimate claim on anyone's possessions, so tax reductions ought to seem like a good thing if you're an anarchist. When the state reduces taxes, it's reducing its assault on people's labor, commandeered when the state seizes its fruits and possessions. But the state, nonetheless, acts unfairly and promotes inefficiency when it imposes higher, unjust burdens on some because it has exempted its favorites from some or all tax liabilities. Suppose a municipality wants to attract a big box retailer. It may try to do so by offering the retailer a sweetheart deal on sales taxes. On paper, the deal is, indeed, a reduction in the tribute demanded by the state. In reality, even though it's not a subsidy, it functions just like one. The state singles out a particular recipient for special treatment and improves its economic position in relation to everyone else's. Since other retailers don't benefit from the sweetheart deal, they're at a disadvantage when compared to the big box retailer. This kind of privilege encourages inefficient behavior. If it weren't inefficient, it would happen without the privilege, and provides special advantages to the politically influential, while also increasing the power of the state, since it's the source of the goodies to be dispensed to its favorites.